this is Brad Bailey. The date is August 9th, 2018. I'm in New York City. And I'm having an interview with Stephen Bernstein. And for the record, could you give me your name and your birth date?
Yes, I'm Stephen Bernstein, and my birth date is the 27th of March, 1941.
Okay, great. And this interview is in conjunction with the Stonewall Oral History Project.
Yes, sir.
To collect interviews from people who were around during that time period. So it's great to meet you.
Pardon?
It's great to meet you.
Delighted to meet you too, Brad. This is an interesting project.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I was raised between here, New York City, and Massachusetts, a small town called Leominster, and then on Cape Cod, both Falmouth and Martha's Vineyard. So I was a very lucky kid. I had the city life as well as the country life.
Why were you raised between the two cities?
My dad was the vice president of Foster Grant Company, which in that era was the world's largest plastic company of sunglasses, combs, picture frames, notebooks. And the executive offices were here on the 78th floor of the Empire State Building, and the manufacturing was in Massachusetts. So he was back and forth, so consequently we were all back and forth between the two places.
So would you say you spent most of your time equally between both two places?
I did, yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about your childhood growing up?
Sure. It was very charming. In many ways, when you're a kid, you're clueless as to other people's experiences. And I had a lovely time because when we were in New York, we lived in hotels, and I love hotel living. It was very glamorous, I thought. And then in Massachusetts, we were always near a lake or a beach or the ocean in Falmouth and on Martha's Vineyard. And Martha's Vineyard in that era was not an elite place by any means. It was always lovely, but it didn't have this cachet that it has now of being, for the very, very wealthy and presidents vacationing there. That wasn't what it was like. It was simple in that era, and all the cars were always 20 years behind what was on the mainland. So it was always just a wonderful place. And I grew up, I was a kid actor, so I always saw a lot of Broadway shows because my parents liked it. And I started doing summer stock and some national tours and acting from when I was just about 8 years old into my 30s. And that was kind of the life I lived.
And so, as a kid actor, what was some of the major sort of things you learned in general during that period?
I learned always to listen and pay attention. It was a different era. Now I look at these kids and I'm in awe of them and their talent. For the most part, when I did it, and I was a stage actor, I was not in film and TV. I didn't have that talent. I was always aware of the camera, and it kind of froze me. But the stage I loved terrifically.
1 second, you just gotta wait for those sirens. They were okay for a little bit.
They're coming for us.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you we're going to go from, I want to sort of get a quick sketch or map of from growing up through right before Stonewall. So if you don't mind just sort of going, give me the general trajectory of what happened,
Okay.
Quit college and we're not going to spend too much time there, but I wanted some context.
Okay,
of course,
sure.
So people can understand who you are.
Okay.
and the great things that you've seen and done. So,
Okay. Well, ask me the question and I'll answer, because
Absolutely.
that's the best way for me.
Absolutely.
And if I go off on a tangent, stop me.
No, I'm not going to stop you.
Okay.
Just
Or
do
edit it out, whatever you do,
what you need to do.
Yeah.
We should get
So I guess with acting, was that like a full-time profession as a kid, or was it more part-time?
No, I was in school. I was a kid, and my parents would only let me do it in summers or maybe from April to September. And I was fine with that. I needed to get out of the house. I wanted to do this. I had fallen in love with puppet shows. And then when I discovered that people could be on a stage, it changed everything. So I wanted to do that as well. And I had a lovely time. But in my era, there wasn't a lot of training. I did well because I had a good memory and I could copy what the director wanted me to do. And in that era, they would never do this today, but in my time, they would give you, ideas of line readings, how to say things, and then they would tell you, you have to make this your own. And that was the only training I had. And it worked for me in that particular period of time. And then as I grew up and went to theater schools, I went to Carnegie Tech and Goodman Theater in Chicago, and in New York studied with both Sandy Meisner and Philip Burton, who were wonderful teachers of that era. The more training I had, the more confused I got. So it was odd for somebody that had worked a lot to suddenly have training afterwards.
Well, that's expected.
Yeah.
So where did you go to high school?
I went to Williston Academy in East Hampton, Massachusetts, as well as a school called the Roosevelt School in Stamford, Connecticut.
Okay. And so where did you graduate from?
I graduated from the Roosevelt School in high school. I went to Carnegie Tech after for only a year. I was in some strange program where I was being moved from theater school to theater school and trying something out. It was a not very successful experiment, but it was fun doing it because I loved being in Chicago. And at the Goodman Theater, you had a lot of practical experience acting because they had children's theater as well as main stage and studio shows. So you were always doing a play as well as being in school. So it was quite thrilling.
So the Goodman Theater is in Chicago.
Yes.
And Carnegie Tech is also.
Carnegie Tech's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh, of course, yeah.
And now it's called Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. So Carnegie Tech became Carnegie Mellon
Yes.
University. All right.
Yes.
And so what year? Sure.
Oops.
We are on 48th Street.
I wonder what
I
it
actually
is.
have a feeling Carnegie was Pittsburgh, but I want to confirm it because
Yeah.
everything Carnegie is Pittsburgh, or
Yeah.
Pittsburgh is Carnegie. My
Yes.
great-grandma used to live
Except
there.
Carnegie Hall.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they probably.
It's all Andrew
It's all-
Carnegie,
it's
isn't
all
it?
them.
Yeah.
So you graduated from Roosevelt in Stanford, and so you immediately moved to Pittsburgh after that.
Yes, I did for a year.
For a year, and then from after that you moved. You said you bounced around.
I was in Chicago 2.5 years, and then I came to New York and studied with Sandy Meisner and Philip Burton here, and started working.
So
And,
what year was that? Graduating from high school?
high school was 61,
61.
and I came to New York on my own, having lived here and grown up here and always known it. But I got a great apartment in Greenwich Village on Cornelia Street, 3.5 rooms for $24 a month. That was the era, and a 5-floor walk-up with a garden on the roof. But it was terrific, and that era was wonderful. And everybody lived in apartments, $60 or less that I knew, and they were terrific apartments. And I went to school. The school I went to was on 23rd Street and 2nd Avenue.
Sorry, what year was that again?
That was 63.
63.
And then in 1965, I did the American Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, Connecticut. I was in their student company, which was thrilling to do it. I'd never had great Shakespeare chops, though. I was much more a contemporary actor than doing Shakespeare. But it was a great experience because sometimes it's better to know what you're not good at as what you're good at. Yeah.
So essentially, your career at that time was an actor, a full-time actor.
Yes,
right?
yes,
Okay.
yes, Brad.
And in theater productions.
Yes.
Great. And so was it like a robust time for you at that time? Or
Yeah, I did a lot of commercials and voiceovers, and I had one Broadway show, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which was terrific. I had like a small nothing role. I was in the court, but I was an understudy to the mime troupe that was in the show, and I got to go on a lot. So it was really thrilling. And it wasn't easy, but what was easy is you didn't You didn't have to remember lines because the troupe was a mime troupe and you didn't have any lines. You just had actions. And so it was all choreographed. And it was really wonderful to do it.
And so, what was that address on Cornelia Street, if you can recall?
Oh, I was on 26 Cornelia Street.
And how far is that from Stonewall?
Very close. It's not a 5-minute walk.
5-minute walk, okay.
Not a 5-minute walk.
So can you describe to me, before we get to life in the village at that time, were you out at that time? Or?
Absolutely.
You were, okay.
Yeah, I've never not been out. That word didn't exist, but I was who I am.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure.
Your process growing up?
Yeah, I feel like I was very lucky because I have friends and I read stories about people who grew up thinking they were the only one on earth. But I was in theater, so there were gay men around me all over that were not like my dad and his friends. So although I didn't know what the difference was, I could identify with some of these men that I was like them. So I never felt alone. You know, I was very secure in who I was, and because of theater, because of it. So, and in that era, it was so free and easy. You couldn't go out to do your laundry without meeting somebody on the street and making a date for later in the day, or, you know, having dinner, or, you know, tricking, whatever it was. You know, it was a very free era because it was the start of the sexual revolution. And there we all were, the people in the right age range, we were there. And so it was normal. That was what was normal. And it was normal for straight people as well as for gay people. You know, you thought nothing of stopping and chatting with somebody on the street. Nowadays, everybody's on their phone and they don't see anybody on the street. But then, I have friends now in my life, 60 years later, that I met on the street in the 1960s. So, you know, God bless that.
So, but that atmosphere was that atmosphere before you moved to New York or once you got to New York?
Well, I think I was more recognizing it, Brad, when I lived here on my own, because when I was a kid, I was always with an adult, or, you know, I wasn't on the streets generally alone. And so I wasn't aware of it, but I became, you know, it just was the normal of that era, that you met people that way. And, you know, and all you had to do was walk around the village or walk on Central Park West or go on 53rd Street, and that's where gay men were, and you met each other.
And you mentioned your dad and his friends, that your friends in theater were different than your dad and your friends, and what do you mean by that?
Well, my father was just a very vital, vibrant, exquisite businessman, and absolutely straight, as were his friends. And I wasn't anything like that. You know, I mean, he never knew what to do with me. Fortunately, I was good at dribbling basketball and making baskets, so that was one thing I could do, and I was a great swimmer. But otherwise, I was lousy at sports, and I was much more interested in art and theater than in the things. He had trained to be in the Olympics. He never made the team, but he was a diver in his youth. And so, you know, he had that exquisite talent. I didn't have that, but I had what I had. You know, so that's what I mean. And the gay men I knew were like set designers, directors, actors, and they were all very secure in who they were, extremely secure. So it made me very aware.
And was there any tension at all between you and your father?
Oh God, yes. But it resolved itself, and our relationship ended up being very lovely. But as a kid, we were always locking horns.
Because of what?
Yeah, well, I didn't want to do what they wanted me to do. I wanted to be doing theater. I wanted to be in stock. I had an opportunity when I was 16 to do a Broadway show, and my parents wouldn't let me because it would interfere with school. And it was like it was terrible. It was like awful because the trajectory of my life would have probably been very different had I taken that job. But I had my favorite uncle, Alan, who was a Berkeley professor, said to me, all we have are our choices. And you're going to be 18 soon and you'll be able to be autonomous and do what you want to do. So hold off, and you're your parents' son now, but then you'll be on your own. And from when I was on my own, I made my choices and my own life.
So once you moved to New York, and had started to set up your own life, what was your relationship like with your parents at that point?
Very good, because I got jobs, and they were encouraged.
And they knew you were gay.
Not really, no, they didn't. I mean, we'd never talked about it. They met boyfriends, they met girlfriends. I had as many women friends as guy friends, so I always had girls around. And we never spoke about it. I mean, ultimately they knew because I became partnered, but my mother had died, and I became partnered with Daniel Cass, a delightful, wonderful actor, singer, dancer, and we were together 18 years before he passed away. So
you mentioned, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
But you mentioned life in the village, so gay life in the village. So give me a few more details about life in the village, especially around that period of time from, you said you got there in 63,
Yes.
so in 65, so between 63, 65, and 69, give me some details or sort of a brief snapshot of life in the gay village.
The village was a small town. There were no commercial large shops anywhere. Some stores had rent of $300 on Bleecker Street. So it was full of antique stores, secondhand clothing stores, record stores. It was the first place I ever had a yogurt. I mean, which, now 2-year-olds are eating yogurt. We didn't even know from yogurt. I mean, that was the first time I ever saw yogurt in a little glass jug. It was very friendly. It was a small town. You could go out and have a glass of wine and supper for $9. It was wonderful. I think I mentioned my rent was $24 a month for 3.5 rooms. And the previous tenant had made a garden on the roof, and I could go up the steps to the roof, the fire escape steps, and I grew tomatoes, zucchini, and potatoes in pots on my roof. It was a very innocent era. And there wasn't a day you didn't make a friend or meet somebody, because you would chat on the street to everyone. And it was a very friendly place.
And so, can you describe some of the tensions then of that era? I'm sure that even with that openness, there must have been some conflict with, because of the period of time it was in. Anything that would sort of pop up in your head about it?
Well, certainly in bars, and certainly between the police and gay people, there was, of course, a spoken about tension. I mean, we were all aware of it, and you behaved in a certain way on the street. I mean, people weren't smoking dope on the street in that era, and you behaved. You were pretty cautious for the most part, unless you were, cruising or looking for something, on the docks or the pier or whatever it was. But that wasn't my existence, so I didn't have that experience. But there certainly was tension, and the village police station was it on 10th Street? Wherever that was, it was like you knew to be cautious and clever. If you were walking past the police station, you didn't call attention to yourself.
What did that mean, cautious and clever?
Just that you weren't like being screaming on the street or carrying on or singing show songs or whatever, it was.
Being openly gay.
Yes, you wouldn't be openly gay, but I mean, we were gay enough anyway, just wandering down the streets then. Yeah.
So how many times then had you been to? You said there was tension. Was that tension sort of rising, or was it sort of the same? What was the level of tension as Stonewall approached?
Well, in my personal orbit, it was not that bad, but with the habituaries of the Stonewall, it was abusive. And that was what the difference was. I was a working actor then, and so I didn't really go to bars at night and hang out in the bar environment because I would have a matinee to do or I would have an evening performance, and you had to, have your disciplines in place. And I was in shows going on the road. I did a play called Cambridge Circus that was directed by John Cleese, who then took Cambridge Circus and turned it into Monty Python. And I did that for about 3 years on the road. So I was in and out of town a lot. And I didn't experience this tension personally. But the one time, only once, I went to Stonewall with friends and before the incident. And it was very different in there because it was, what's the word? It was a marginalized crowd of people. So because it was marginalized, they were used to being abused by the police.
And what do you mean by marginalized?
Well, drag queens, people, lesbians that dressed as men that just always dressed as women. I don't know that there were that many trans people in that era. There were certainly people. I mean, there was Christine Jorgensen, the most famous, and then other people that followed suit, but it wasn't like today where, a 7-year-old knows they're trapped in another body. It's like amazing today. I'm thrilled for it. I'm thrilled for them. So I recognized on my own, there was a red light and I'm mixed up, but the red light either went on or off if police were coming into the Stonewall. It was like a clue. Like you had to behave, and if you were like hugging somebody or you had your arm around somebody, you immediately stopped that. And if you, and there were always like some, women and men there, so they would, if they weren't interacting with each other, if a policeman came in, they interacted, and so I think those clients of that bar experienced it more than I did.
And do you think then, this is an interesting question, I think, I don't know if people ask it or not, do you think because you were sort of a white man during that period of time, with some degree of affluence and, ability to do things that you needed to do you think that was a difference maybe, what do you think there was a difference between your sort of lived experiences and some of the individuals from the bar who were of color or trans or drags in terms of, even though both are gay, how just their different levels of marginalization and...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely. And I wasn't pestered in there. The one time I was in there, I wasn't pestered. And I actually met someone that night who was exactly like me, and it was like we were us in a different kind of show. I loved it though. My mother took me to see the Club 82, a great drag show downtown, where the waiters were lesbians and men drag, and the show was drag queens as men, and they had men playing men, and some people were called ponies. It was this incredible place, and it was very talentful and funny with comedians, and my mother took me. I was 18 years old going to see these shows. So I had an appreciation for the art form. I was never good at it. I didn't have that gift, but I deeply appreciated it. But yes, your point is absolutely right, because I was like preppy. I was like in a Brooks Brothers shirt and a polo shirt in the summer and khakis. I wasn't really calling my attention out in any kind of flamboyant way, which the residents of Stonewall were. So obviously I was just like, a bump on the log in there. They didn't pay any attention to me.
And right then before, what do you then recall sort of the night of the incident? What was your first recollection of that there was something going on there?
Well, it was later that night.
And how old were you during this time?
it was 1969. Well, I was born in 41. I'm horrible at math, but there we are. Let them figure it out. Yeah, okay. But I had known Judy Garland. I was an actor, and I knew her. I was running around with her younger daughter, Lorna Luft, who was friends with many of my friends who were in a musical of that time called Henry, Sweet Henry.
Is Lorna still alive?
Yes, Lorna's very much alive and a performer and a thrilling singer and actress. She took a big break and raised her children and had a lovely family. And in fact, I saw her at 54 Below this year doing a club act. She's a thrilling talent, an absolute thrilling talent. And she did a wonderful show called Songs My Mother Taught Me. And they were, she and Liza had both stayed away from doing a lot of Garland songs, but in these later years they've done them. But I knew Judy Garland via Lorna, and we would go, she was in 66, 67 in that era, she was doing shows at the Palace Theater. You could see her for $9.95. And I was in rehearsal then for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And we would just be kidding. Like every night we'd say, what are we going to do tonight? And everybody would say Garland. So we went over and over to see it. You could get a seat upstairs or a cancellation in the orchestra. And though the songs were the same every night, the show was always different because of different people in the audience and who Judy might bring up or if her kids were there. And so that night when Stonewall happened, I was in line at Frankie Campbell Funeral Home up on Madison Avenue to pay my respects to Miss Garland. And it was a long line. It went on for blocks and blocks and blocks. And when I finally got in and went by her coffin, I think I'm remembering that it was open because, as a friend of mine said, she looked so small. But I don't really remember that, and I think it's like a block I have. I don't really remember, because when she was alive, she was the most vital and alive and funny person ever. She was so funny in life, and you're not funny in death. You're lying there, and I can't remember if the coffin was open or not. It's just a block. But that's where I was that first night. And then later on the news, on the radio, when I got home, it talked about Stonewall. And then the next day, my friends and I said, we've got to go down there.
What did it say on the radio that
It said that there had been an incident and arrests at the Stonewall Inn. And there had been a rebellion. Maybe that was actually the word. And there was a great radio personality of that era, Barry Gray, who was very gay-friendly, on WMCA. And it was one of the first stations that had talk radio. And Barry Gray was horrified at how the patrons of the bar had been treated. And they fought back. And I have always thought, and a lot of my friends, and it was talked about in that era, that Garland's death was one of the precipitators of this event, because the bar patrons were just so sad. We were all heartbroken. She ought to have had years more. We were heartbroken. And that heartbreak, that people that identified with her so strongly, gay men and drag queens in this bar, they had enough. They had had enough, and they fought back that night. And many of us felt that it was the Garland death that helped it along. And I feel that very strongly, that her passing had a big influence in what happened at the Stonewall.
It's interesting because, a lot of people don't really obviously
Yes.
it's interesting that, her death was on the 28th of June,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously Stonewall was literally right after.
No, her death was on the 26th, I believe.
Okay, 26th, okay.
But what happened was she died in London,
Got it.
and her
And
body
then-
was
sorry,
brought back here. So it was what it was here was a little bit different. I mean, in London, there were lines of people outside the hotel, and
Yeah.
it was such a it became for the people that were in her orbit, that adored her, it was an out and out tragedy. It was, I mean, that's what everybody was talking about in therapy forever after that. It was that she left, almost the same like after Lady Diana was killed in, that car accident. I have a friend that's a therapist. He said, my God, for 4 months, that's all anybody talked about was her. And it was the same with Garland. It was what all my friends said, oh gosh, it's like, this is what's going on in therapy, because it was seismic.
In your opinion, what was her connection with the gay community at that time?
Well, she was a heroine, and she had been abused by the system terribly. She'd been fed drugs and controlled so much by MGM, and she performed at full-out throttle brilliantly, always, and gave great shows, great concerts in person, but it had always been hammered down, and that's what gay people felt. We all always had been hammered down, and you couldn't be who you were. Even if you were comfortably out, and that word didn't exist then, you still had to pretend on the street or be cautious, as I said earlier.
So
And-
that was, go ahead. Sorry.
And her connection was that she was unequivocally herself. She was herself, and there were lessons in that, and we all learned them. We who would see her shows, and she was just divinely gay friendly. Just divinely gay friendly.
And so you mentioned that the first night because you heard it on the radio with Barry Gray, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously you were at the funeral home that day, and then the next. Then you decided what? Once you'd heard that, what did you do?
My friends, I went with my friend Charlie Sorrell, a set designer friend Charles Brandon, and a few other people, and we decided we were gonna. I wasn't living in the village then, so I had moved from
You had
Cornelia.
moved from
I had
Cornelia
moved
Street,
from
okay.
Cornelia Street,
So
but
where-
we all. Then I was living at 821 Second Avenue. At 44th Street and 2nd Avenue. And we all decided we were going to go to the village and have supper and go hang out at the Stonewall. We didn't realize it was going to be blocks and blocks and blocks of people.
So that next morning, because you
No,
had-
we went in the afternoon. I think we went out to lunch somewhere in the village, and
and you got there.
and then we went there, and it was packed with people outside on the street, and we couldn't get. Ultimately, we got sort of close to it. We got closer and closer, but in the beginning, it was like gay pride. It was like just streets of people, and the police were absolutely overwhelmed. It was thrilling. It was absolutely thrilling. Brad, it was like you'd never seen anything like it. It was like. I've read in history, I've read about demonstrations in the 1800s when, there were child prostitution rings and, boy children were getting killed, and there were really like demonstrations. This reminded me of what I'd read about in my gay history books, because we didn't fight back really, but then we did.
So you guys got down there, and there's a crowd of people, and then what happened next?
Huge crowd,
What happened
huge.
next?
All along that street, all in front of the bar, going off to Bleecker Street, going on 7th Avenue, going west on Christopher Street. There were just people assembling. And it wasn't set up like an ACT UP demonstration, from the 80s and 90s where there weren't the police barricades yet. I think that probably happened. That was the only night I went to it, and it was powerful enough, and I didn't really want to go again, and I think I was working, so I couldn't go again.
Oh, so sorry. So you were there. You had to go to work again that night.
I had to go to work the next day or something. Yeah, I'm not sure what I was doing, but I had a job. And but that second day after the Stonewall riot, that second day was absolutely thrilling. It was. I hadn't seen. I hadn't seen that many gay people in all diverse stratas in one place gathered. You know, there were theater queens, drag queens, lesbians, leather queens, business people in suits and ties. It was all of us. And it was so powerful and so moving, and it changed. It changed everything. It changed. You know, gay men in business suits and ties were not next to leather queens in bars. Everybody had their own bar in that era. You know, it wasn't like that. And there we all were. Also, you know, when the Gay Community Center happened and they started the garden parties, of which my company, I became a caterer, and my catering company did the first and third garden party. That too had these diverse realms of people all together, and that changed us. It just changed us. We got stronger because we were all in separate groups, and so we got stronger.
And so, sure,
Change media.
sure, absolutely. Great, thank you. I just wondered
Sure.
how was that? So, King, you mentioned that you had went down to the village on that second day. Can you talk to me? Give me some descriptors about the environment again, if you don't mind. But by doing so, tell me about the conversations you heard on the street.
Oh, well, it was exciting because we came out of the subway at Sheridan Square, and there were just so many more people than would ordinarily be there on an afternoon. So it was a gathering. It was a gathering. So you saw lots and lots of people. And I said diverse people. I mean, it was interesting because guys were in drag in the late afternoon, not, you know, hiding at night in it. You know, that was very unusual, even in the village, to see so many people. It was almost like the later version of the Halloween parade. You know, there were all these people. And again, as I said, and there were guys in leather vests and chaps and, you know, Brooks Brothers dressed business guys, and the age diversions were incredible because it was very young. They were teenagers and kids with their parents, and you know, there were baby carriages. It was amazing. It was just amazing. And so I don't know that I necessarily overheard conversations, but everybody was excited about it, and no one was going to stand for the police abuse anymore. And that was the sort of deep riding feeling that was going through my friends and I. And you would recognize people. You'd see people, you know, I was seeing lots of actors that I knew, and in my age range and older, you know, people you saw at auditions and people that you saw like waiting in the hallway before you went in. Everybody was, you know, that was what was going on, and that was what was exciting, Brad, was that the diverse people all coming together and backing up what had happened that evening before.
And so you said, what do you remember what time of day you may have left to go to work that day?
No, I didn't work that day for some reason. You know, we went down and had lunch. We came out in Sheridan Square and we had lunch somewhere in the village. There were 4 other people. I only remember the 2 Charlies and myself, and there were 2 girls, and I'm sorry I don't remember who, because we didn't stay lifelong friends. They were friends of my friends. But then we went out and then we were just chanting, and just, you know, somebody would lead with a chant and you'd say something on the street, and I was like no more abuse and other things like that. But and we, as I said at first, we were not close to the Stonewall. We got a little closer to it as it happened, and then it got kind of hysterical and very crowded, and we backed away and left.
What do you mean by that?
It was just too many people. It was like you couldn't breathe in the crush of people.
Was there an energy that was...
Oh, the energy was great.
Okay.
You know, I'm just mentioning the, you know, also we had to go to the bathroom, and there was a place to go to the bathroom. So, you know, we had to leave to because we'd been standing and maybe 3 or 4 hours. You know.
And so, did you so that so that what time of day was that you guys left the crowd?
Maybe between 8 and 9 in the evening.
Oh wow, that late.
Yeah.
And then you went back home to go to work.
Just back home.
Back
Yeah,
home. Okay,
back home. Yeah.
And then what was the next?
Well, it was
What
making the
happened?
paper, and it was on the radio. It was fascinating, and the story grew. The story grew, and the story became a movement. And there it is to this day. The name Stonewall changed history.
So, what about that third? So that second night you went back home. What did you hear anything on the radio?
I don't remember. I was so exhausted I fell asleep. I didn't even get into bed. I just fell asleep on my sofa. I just went to sit down and I fell asleep sitting down. Because I was at such a high level, such a pitch of excitement, and seeing this group of people standing up. We didn't stand up for ourselves. We couldn't. You'd be thrown into prison. You'd be beat up. Something would happen to you, if you were in that orbit.
Yeah.
So it was exhaustingly exciting. It was just thrilling.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, no.
And so that next day, what happened next, if you can recall?
Everybody was talking about it in my friends. I mean, that's all we were talking about, and we were wondering if it was going to really change things. I don't think we looked at it in an historical context. I don't think we were that clever. I think we were just looking at it. Is this going to change things? Are these people going to be able to be in a bar and not have a red light go on or off, meaning that they can't hug each other, they can't dance? I think you needed something called a cabaret license in order to dance or sing in a bar. You weren't even allowed to dance, and of course in that bar people would be dancing to the jukebox or whatever. So I'm unsure about it, but I remember I did some shows in clubs, and there was something called the cabaret license that was on the wall, and useless, but it was there. It was so the city could make money on issuing a license.
And so that next day, did you go to work or?
I don't remember what I was doing. I know I was acting in something. I was doing something, and so I couldn't go back to the village, and I kind of felt. I was very active in ACT UP years later, and that I was in the demonstrations, a lot of them, both here and in London and in Paris. But then I thought, I've done my thing. I was there. I did it the second day. It wasn't that I thought it was over. It was just that I didn't have the energy to go be on the street again. I just didn't have it. And I was doing something else. I can't remember what. I'm sorry, Brad. But I had some work that I had to do.
No, this is great. This is all fantastic because you were there. And so in the immediate aftermath of Stonewall, what was life? What was life like for you, and then what was life like for the gay community in New York City?
It was a bit freer, but I had always felt personally free. I said that, I guarded myself in situations. Sometimes I think I became a little less guarded. I was freer in who I was. But, we always were sort of free in the village. In the rest of town, but as I said, I was an actor, so I would be if I were going to look for, a job and I was going to an audition, I would be in the drag of the character I was going to audition for. So I'd be in a suit and tie if it was something preppy. I'd be casual if, you wanted to suggest who you were because you never thought casting people had enough sense to picture you the way you would be, So, siren.
Go ahead. You said we would pause, like people you would Okay, so go finish your last statement.
But my friend, excuse me,
You're fine. Take your time.
my friends and I all felt freer. We all felt way freer. And I'll tell you where else it was freer, which is very interesting. There was a wonderful place on 2nd Avenue called the Fillmore East that did rock concerts. Bill Graham had brought it from San Francisco. And I had friends that were running it, Ann and John Morris at that point and so I had a pass to go to Fillmore East. And it was way freer after Stonewall. I don't know, it was affecting music, it was affecting venues. We would always sit at Fillmore East in the mezzanine, and you wouldn't believe this, but it's the absolute truth. At the end of the mezzanine seats, sometimes there would be local policemen from the beat, and they'd have a joint with us. It was like so funny. The cops would, because we would pass a joint along the row, and a cop would have a toke of dope and pass it back. I mean, it was still the sexual revolution. That was still going on, 67, 68, 69. And into the early 70s, it was still going on. They couldn't stop it. But it was fascinating to me that police would be there having a toke of dope. And that was, I'm not saying that's a result of Stonewall, but it was an observation that my friends and I made. This is different. And what had changed? Stonewall, you know.
And so, can you give me sort of a brief snapshot? Well, I guess, what was your activism like in that time period? You said you were in the theater before Stonewall. Were you very active in sort of an activist way before?
No.
Okay.
No, I wasn't an activist. Well, I take that back. I was anti-Vietnam. I wasn't a gay activist in any way. No way at all. But I protested against Vietnam vehemently. And I was even in a march on Washington. I was locked up in a paddy wagon with Norman Mailer. It was fascinating. And I would run into him later in my years as a caterer, and we would always talk about that. I'd remind him about that. So in that way, I was an activist. And because I just didn't understand my friends and I couldn't understand what was going on in Vietnam, and it just seemed so wrong. And then, of course, Kent State just mobilized us to be just like loudly protesting. So in that way, I was a protester, yes. But as a gay protester, not until ACT UP. And I was very early in ACT UP.
What year was that?
88.
Okay, so it was a while.
88. So long, yeah, but I mean, friends were dying, things were going on. My partner and I were not full-time in Manhattan then because we had opened a restaurant upstate New York in a small town called Phoenicia, a disaster. I mean, not the town, the restaurant. I can tell the story in 4 words: artistic triumph, financial disaster, the end. And also Danny was sick then and dying. So, I mean, from his diagnosis to his death was 6 months.
Oh.
So it was
Oh,
terrible.
diagnosis
It was
of what?
terrible. It was.
Diagnosis of HIV? And what year was
Yeah.
that?
That was 88, 89. He was diagnosed in 88 and died on the actual Memorial Day of 1989, May 30th. But I was a very violent to a good extreme gay activist from that moment on.
So that spurred you to
Yes, absolutely. And one of the most wonderful things outside Stonewall in the 80s was gay men on that whole street screaming down Ed Koch, trying to make a speech, because he did nothing. He was like Reagan. He did lip service and nothing. Reagan didn't even do lip service. He didn't speak about it till his 7th or 8th year in office. It was horrible. It didn't need to get out of the control and become this worldwide epidemic if Reagan had said something. And, you know, the heroes were, Princess Diana and Elizabeth Taylor. They were the heroes in that era of, talking about and sitting on beds with people with AIDS and holding their hands. I mean, I don't know what I think we behaved very well, the gay community, in that era, and how and Larry Kramer forming both GMHC and then ACT UP. What a hero! What an absolute hero he is to have done that. And he mobilized. And again in ACT UP, it's the same thing now. I would say Stonewall became the template for diversified gay people in different gay communities coming together. And that's what happened in ACT UP, because there was every kind of gay man, every kind of gay woman. And, you know, and long before that, you didn't see it. At least in my life, I didn't see it. You know, I was with always the preppy gay kids or the theater gay kids. You know, I was never with the leather people. I was never with the drag queens. And then suddenly we were all together, both because of Stonewall and then ACT UP.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Actually, you did go into it. Like, what was Stonewall's impact?
It's immeasurable.
To that history of activism.
It's immeasurable. How can you?
Sorry, repeat that.
I mean, you can write it forever. You can just think about it. It's immeasurable because it brought. How do I say? It brought all the diverse aspects of a community together. We didn't have strength because we were all in these different pods. And then all the pods came together. There we were together at last. And ACT UP, God bless it, ACT UP got parallel track testing. ACT UP brought drugs closer. ACT UP did so much. And my partner had died, and I had been told by my doctor that if I didn't take AZT, I'd be dead in 6 months. And I wasn't going to take it because I saw my friends dying from it as much as from the virus. And I went from 1989 to 1999 alone on my own with no drugs, Western drugs. I did it my way, and here I am today. I'm a very lucky man to be on Earth. And I was going in 1989, after Danny died, I went to Europe to see friends there because I thought, well, if I am going to die, I'm going to do a goodbye tour, and I'm going to see my friends in Amsterdam, London, and Paris. And in Paris, ACT UP was forming. So I became like a guest person, and my friends Howard Pope and Michael Barr, both from ACT UP in New York, were there at the same time. And we did demonstrations, and we talked at ACT UP meetings, and it was really very exciting. And they were so thrilled to have us there because we were bringing a little bit of New York to Paris. And it was very exciting, and I was thrilled. And we marched on the Champs-Élysées, we marched in different avenues and streets. It was exciting, Brad. It was so exciting. And so I think my activism, my own personal activism, I can only really speak for me, was born because of Vietnam protests and then because of Stonewall. Those are the two biggest influences in my life, where I can't stand anything unjust. It makes me nuts, so those were very big influences.
And here we are.
Yes, here we are.
In 2018.
It's amazing.
What do you think today's, after all that you've seen, what are your thoughts about sort of the progress of the gay community today compared to from that period to today? What are your thoughts about that?
Wow. Phew. That's loaded. I'm proud of us. I'm very proud of the community. Housing Works wouldn't exist without people from ACT UP that created it. I'm having a momentary, I can't remember the guy's name. He was wonderful, but he created Housing Works. Look what they do for thrift shops and getting people places to live. Look at ACT UP and parallel track testing and all the things it's done. And other activists have learned from the gay community how to do things. Now we have Rise and Resist that's against Donald Trump. We have GAG, which is Gays Against Guns, that came out of the Pulse shooting. We're doing the best we can. We're mobilized. Again, it's all groups of people. Look at the kids in Florida after that shooting, the Parkland kids. Look at them. They're thrilling. I mean, I couldn't talk like that when I was 18 and 19 years old. I didn't have that. They are wonderful. They are the politicians, I hope, of the future to undo what's being done by this repugnant regime that we have in power now that doesn't even believe climate change exists, with yet everything going, all these fires and the heat wave all over Europe and the heat wave in this country and people dying from it, and the fact that easily in 120 years there might not be a First Avenue in New York, it might be water. And the same, there isn't going to be a Miami Beach if it keeps. Right now in Miami, the water's coming up through the sewers, and if it rains, it's all over the streets. So there's sewage on the streets. I mean, so these young people, they've learned from everybody. They've learned from these. They've learned from it. And unlike Republicans, they seem to be involved in learning from history. And so I'm proud of everybody. I'm proud of these kids that, make their hair blue or put a stripe down their head, or I'm proud of the people that knit the pink hats to thwart Trump. The demonstrations after Trump, who was so moronic he thought they were for him. I mean, what a moron. And I'm just sorry he has no idea of how his absurdity is mobilizing another generation of people. So I think I'm long-windedly answering you, but I have nothing but hope for the gay community. And I think and look at the people at the Stonewall era. You want one other opinion? They would be flummoxed. Gay marriage? What would they have thought? These people that that were there and maybe are gone now and not on Earth anymore. Gay people getting married, gay people adopting children, gay people fathering children. They wouldn't have a clue as to how this world has changed. And so we are, yes, we're as eccentric as ever, and we are more mainstream than ever. So it's like they're not going to tamp us down anymore, are they? They can't do that. It's like we're here to stay.
Any other sort of last thoughts you want to share? That was fantastic, by the way. But any other last thoughts you want to share about your life or Stonewall's impact, or just anything that you think people need to?
Well, in my life, I'm really so content. I have my wits about me, and I'm mobile, and I admonish everybody to take care of yourself and live well, and enjoy your life, enjoy what you do, and speak your thoughts, speak up for yourself. It's important to do that. It's very, very important. And I bless the memories. I don't bless Judy Garland dying, but I bless her for bringing a community that was in great sorrow about her passing to an action that changed our world. She's portrayed in movies and plays and things as always being this sad creature, and she wasn't. She was so funny. And I'll tell you one story. My friend Lenny Barron was doing her hair for the opening night of Tony Bennett at the Americana, and we were in a suite, and I was helping her get ready, and they put her in an air-conditioned suite, and she had like a beautiful black gamma mink, the What Becomes a Legend most mink on, and she'd had her hair done, she had been left alone for a couple of minutes in a room, and there was this ruckus going on in the room, and we all went, and we went into the room, and she was at the window, and she was banging on the air conditioner, banging on it, and everybody said, "Judy, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I can't get this friggin' TV to work." But she was kidding. She was just kidding us, and she just howled, and it was so funny. It was just, and she just always had something like that. Yes, there was the sorrow about the drugs and all of that stuff, but she was very delightful and funny, and she made a mark on our world. She made a very vibrant mark on our world, and I'm glad that I'm able, in a small way, to acknowledge what she meant to so many people and what she meant to Stonewall.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, Brad, it was thrilling to talk to you. Thank you very much. Thank you for good questions, because I'd be flummoxed, but thank you for the questions.